جميعا. رمضان كريم. يطيب لي رؤيتكم جميعا، ويطيب لنا وجود صديق ومفكر وعالم، وهو شخص موهوب للغاية ورائع.
Admiration, I have to say. I first met Dr. Dev Salar in Milan, where he is adjunct professor at the Catholic University of Milan, teaching courses on Gulf security, Middle East security, and on nuclear disarmament. For the last couple of years, he has been at the United Nations as a senior researcher based in Geneva, where he has worked on issues of weapons of mass destruction and nuclear disarmament. And I have to say that for about a year, I've been trying to get Dr. Dev Salar here, but because of his busy schedule, because he's with the United Nations, we haven't been able to. But we're thrilled that he's with us today, and he will talk about the future of weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, and disarmament in the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dev Salar.
Many thanks, dear Mehran. I cannot really respond to your kind words in a proper way, but thank you for invitation, and thanks for having me here. Thanks to Arab Center and all of you for giving your time today to me and being present here. Well, the topic is, I think, probably raised the question in your mind that while in the region we have witnessed sort of huge numbers of civilian casualties since October 7, around 50,000 people in different ways by both sides of Israeli and Hamas confrontation died in a conventional war or conflict. Why we're talking today about WMD? And the question might rise that, which I think it's a fair question, that is really WMD a threat of today, or that's more a conventional or risk of a conventional outbreak of war that makes the region in a difficult situation. So I start my presentation by raising this question. I think this is a fair question, an important question to answer, that how real is WMD threat in the Middle East? Is it just a sort of hypothetical threat of the future that we are concerned as an intellectual discussion, or that's a real actual threat, and how really we answer to this question impacts the policy area and especially the priority of responding to WMD threat. So I should, fast forward, answer the question that yes, the WMD threat in the Middle East is very real. It's a low probability threat, but a very high risk threat. And it's been a threat on the background of many conflicts and issues that we have witnessed in the last year, especially in the Middle East. So basically, it's true that we have not witnessed a conflict in the last couple of years, I would put it, which the actors aim at using WMD threat in one way or another, or using it in a conflict zone. But the risk of use or escalation to weapons of mass destruction in the conventional war has been in the background of many developments in the region. And that's why the UNGA, UN General Assembly resolution in December 2024, of course, in combination with whatever we have witnessed in Europe after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has led to a new study of the impact of the nuclear use and the impact of a possible future nuclear war on the human civilization and the global security. So if you allow me, I would like to start by giving a bigger picture of what is the situation of the WMD capabilities in the Middle East. So what we know under the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, NPT, we have one state in the region, Israel, which is not signed or ratified NPT, and is widely believed to possess a nuclear weapon. We have 5 countries which, in the past or currently, are accused of proliferation, and in one way or another are not meeting their commitments under NPT. 2 cases, Iran and Syria, are open cases. As many of you know, Iran's nuclear program is under threshold status, so it's a situation of time until, and of course a political willingness until the decision to build the first warhead will prevail. So on the nuclear front, that's the situation. But other aspects of WMD threat are also not in a better situation. Under Chemical Weapon Convention and Biological Weapon Convention, we have a similar situation of non-ratification and non-membership. Egypt is not a member or not signed or not ratified Chemical Weapon Convention, and has signed but not ratified Biological Weapon Convention. And Israel, in the same way, has signed but not ratified Chemical Weapon Convention, but is not a member to Biological Weapon Convention. So as you see, some areas of WMD threat, like biological weapons, is a very ambiguous area. We have few information of what states are doing, and there is a bit of issue with transparency. Of course, we have the case of Syria, which was ratified and is a member of the Chemical Weapon Convention, but under the previous government, we have an allegation under investigation under OPWC about the use of chemical weapons in Syria. So, but before going to the fact that how is the future, I would like to go a bit to the past, because I think that's important that we remember in what context we're talking about. This is a region that probably have seen some of the grave uses of WMD weapons in the past conflicts. Let's not forget that in the 80s, Iraq used, under the Saddam Hussein, used chemical weapons against Iran. And the wounded and injured people are still there and are causing a huge problem. Then, of course, Saddam used against the civilians in Halabja too. The use of a chemical weapon, just not limited to that past. In the Syrian civil war, there were allegations of use by both state and non-state actors, which is very concerning. And of course, there are now new accusations of use in Sudanese conflict. So another aspect of the ongoing trend and the past trend, which is continued till now, is a risk of escalation of a conventional war into a nuclear or chemical aspect. One of the grave moments in the past was 1973 Arab-Israeli war, in which a hypothetical, at least, possibility of Israel using a nuclear weapon against Arab states was on the table to study in order to limit Arab advancements in that war. Of course, that never happened, fortunately, but that was at least a policy discussion at some level in Israel. That threat continued of an escalation of a conventional war to a WMD domain in 1990s and 1991, again under Saddam Hussein and use of a chemical missiles, threat of the use of it against Saudi Arabia and Israel. And then now, fast forward to today, we had it just last year between Israel and Iran, comments by Israeli Minister of Heritage about a possible value of the use of a nuclear weapon in Gaza, and Iranian response to Israeli attack of a possible change in its nuclear policy, which all of them are show a sign of how a conventional war could change its trend and become a non-conventional war, and how fast that trend and that dynamic might evolve, which we may not have a possibility to control at the moment. But another aspect of a very real threat is the past history and the continuation of that policy of a targeting of nuclear facilities in the region. We had it back to 80s again when Iraq attempted to strike and 3 times did it against Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. We had it when Israel bombed Iraq's Oz-Iraq in 1980 and 1981. And then also in Syria in 2007, which Israel bombed Al-Kibr nuclear installations in Syria. But then we have an even more dangerous trend because these three experiences of the past were attacks against nuclear facilities which were not operating. They were under construction. But at least since 2007, you have a new trend, which is a trend of attacking nuclear infrastructures which are operating. So it means that there are nuclear materials there, and there are risks and environmental risks of a possible strike, which one of the first case is Israel and probably US and Israel use of Stuxnet in 2007 in Natanz facilities in Iran. Hamas and Assad, Syria attacked in Dimona against Dimona nuclear facilities in 2014 and 2021. And again, Houthis use of missiles against Emirati nuclear facilities, which of course at that time it was not yet built. And this will continue to the future in terms of a possible advocacy, which these days is a lot on the news also, of a use of a military strike as a counter-proliferation policy, which basically means using a military means against active nuclear facilities in the region. I think the next aspect of the threat is the risk of proliferation, which again is a very updated and everyday topic in these days in the region. We are witnessing a gradual nuclearization of the Middle East. And what I mean by that is that, well, of course, the value of a peaceful use of nuclear energy is recognized by many states in the region. However, let's not forget that the peaceful use of nuclear energy, in order to be secured from possible shift toward the military domain, needs proper safeguard measures and proper and shielding it from a possible political decision that might lead to a possible shift to the military domain. So basically a combination of the political and technical measures will safeguard or prevent a possibility of a peaceful nuclear activity move to a military domain. And since we have a growing interest in the region of a use of a nuclear energy, there are a lot of concerns of how we can technically and politically guarantee that these peaceful uses will not shift to the other areas. And then broader access to new commercial dual-use technologies is a concerning issue, both on the AI and on the non-nuclear aspects, like on the chemical and biological weapons. You have many dual-use technologies which we have not proper export control regimes yet globally, so there is a risk that states or non-state actors can use it. And then remember, in the case of Syria, that state, but also non-state actors used chemical weapons. In the Middle East, one of the unique characters of WMD threats is the risk of a non-state actors possess more WMD capabilities. So this situation is even more concerning given the fact that in some areas we don't have proper global verification mechanisms. So while you have IAEA on the nuclear front, which has proper means and tools to monitor possible proliferation risks, on areas like biological weapons, we don't have an established even global verification mechanism that can guarantee that advancements in some technological areas will not move to the WMD area. So these are the threat dynamics in the Middle East. And that's why I think and the people who are working in this field are very much concerned that the WMD threat is a threat alive, but in the background of whatever today we are seeing. And it may come to the forefront when the political or a military situation is ready for it. So how that moment of a more vivid WMD threat, a more clear WMD threat might emerge in the Middle East. So to answer that, I think let's imagine that we need to answer that how states are deciding and calculate their WMD policies. I think three big factors are impacting their decisions. First is their military strategy, to make it clear how WMD can contribute to their military strategy. The second is the political balancing, which I will explain what I mean by that. And the third area is the global trends and whatever we are seeing at the global level. So we'll try to just get into each of these factors and try to give a sense of where we are in the region and why the risk of a WMD threat in the future is also to be continued, and even probably getting worse than what we are seeing today. The first fact is that, unfortunately, the deterrence in the region is under pressure. The conventional deterrence in the region has been under pressure in the last year. So you have two big states in the region, Israel and Iran, that both perceived a level of a failure of their deterrence models. Israel was not able to prevent October 7 attacks, so its conventional deterrence failed. Of course, its nuclear deterrence was not aimed to prevent that sort of attack, but that moment of the failure of deterrence led to the policymakers in Israel to restore their deterrence and come back and show to their enemies that, well, they're capable of defending their territories. The same way, 2024 was for Iran, a similar moment of start of a rethinking of its conventional deterrence because of its dynamic with Israel. So we're in a situation that there is a perception of a shrinking trust or confidence on conventional deterrence. And I think several factors are contributing to this pattern or broader trend of shrinking reliability or confidence on deterrence. First is reliance on cross-domain strategies. What I mean is that, well, there are more actors that are using different areas of technology and military capability to asymmetrically use them in order to respond to threat. Let me make it clear that, imagine, I can explain this maybe easier with one example. And that is the example of using like a sabotage operation to undermine a nuclear capability of one state, while that state respond by increasing its nuclear activities. You had this experience with the dynamic between Iran and Israel, in which sabotage in Iranian nuclear facilities led to the nuclear escalation. So basically, there is a situation in which states use one threat of a sabotage. However, the response is another domain of a threat, which is nuclear. So they're not very much linear and asymmetrical. And that's what we call cross-domain strategies, in which states use different threats, different tools to answer to the threats which are not necessarily from that domain. And this is very dangerous because it creates a gray zone area in which it's very difficult to understand where are the red lines and where are the perception of the other side's policy is. And as a result, since many of these states in the conflict do not have a direct understanding of each other, and these understandings are based on the signalings, they have a risk of miscalculation, and as a result, this risk of miscalculation is adding to their insecurity. Second area of why deterrence is shrinking is a difficulty of a balance between offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities. So we're in a moment where a sort of technological shift that has led to the proliferation of a low-cost offensive capabilities. That's about drones, on-aerial vehicle systems, unmanned systems. Could be on the sea, could be on the air, it could be drones, but it could be boats without human in them. So all the proliferation and the low cost of them means that there are more actors having them, and as a result, the probability of use is increasing. However, the resource of defending against these capabilities is getting more expensive and more rare. And you have seen that after last year, after Iran-Israel conflict, which led to a sort of a global shortage of air defense missiles, which was caused by, of course, 3 years or 2 years and a half of Ukraine war, and then huge use of Iranian use of missiles and drones, which led in a medium term in a shortage of air defense missiles on the Israeli side. So as a result, there is this complexity of how you can punish your adversary or deter your adversary in a conventional domain, because the balance between offense and defense is changing. The other area which is problematic for the conventional deterrence is about the ambiguity. So there are more ambiguity about the state's military policies, policies which are not properly and directly communicated by states. The states are having or intentionally do not want to clarify that how they may use a certain capability and when they may introduce a certain capability into the war. And that's what we call ambiguity. And as a result, again, it goes back to the concept of assessing the intentions and guessing what would be the next stage or next policy of one particular state. And as a result, this ambiguity is causing a shrinking confidence on capabilities at one state's side. And the last factor is about the continuation of strategic vacuums and spillovers. And what I mean by strategic vacuums are those security challenges in the weak or ungoverned territories that you had it like in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq for a long time, that led to understanding of some actors that might be an opportunity to gain leverage or gain a military advantage there. And as a result, it led to the new threat perceptions by other actors. So this situation has continuing, and it is continuing, and as a result, continuously undermining states' perception that their current deterrence is enough. So on the military side, these 4 factors that I said are increasing the saliency of WMD. So basically, there are more actors in the region are concluding or might conclude in the future that, well, what they have as a conventional military force is not enough to defend their territories. This is a conclusion that Israel has gone to that direction years before, and has argued, the Israeli argument is that, well, the existential, the nuclear deterrence is a guarantee for safeguarding its existence. Similar direction seems to be the Iranian thinking, in which is moving toward that direction, that if the conventional capabilities are not enough, and if the existence of the state depends on shaping a new deterrence, well, then why not WMD? So it's interesting that how Israel and Iran are getting closer in the way that they're thinking, which is a rising saliency of WMD. However, there's a political aspect of this situation too, which is about the competitions and political balancing. And what means is that, well, having a nuclear capability or any sort of WMD capability has a broader political and regional implications, which is basically about the change in a balance of a power in the region. So the possessor obviously has a higher political leverage over the other actors. And as a result, it forces the competitors to react. And often the competitors have decided to reciprocally react and balance by creating a capability of a similar kind. And here you have 2 examples of Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which in the Middle East have decided or have practiced a long practice of balancing the other side's capability. One important case is Egypt's reciprocal non-proliferation measures regarding Israel, which is about refusal of signing the CWC Chemical Weapon Convention and delaying ratifying the Biological Weapon Convention and the African WMD Free Zone, Nuclear Weapons Free Zone, and CTBT in response to Israel's nuclear ambiguity policy and not membership in the NPT. And the other example is Saudi Arabia, which has clearly announced that it may go nuclear if Iran goes nuclear. So this balancing policy is an area that is existing in the region and is probably going to be continued. However, there's a new area which is also emerging, and that is about the global trend and how that global trends are impacting the decisions in the region. Especially in the last 2 years, we have witnessed how nuclear capability used by Russia in order to manage its conflict in Ukraine. And what I mean by that management of conflict, it means that pushing the other side of the conflict, which the Western countries, to introduce their capabilities in the war later or slow down their support of Ukraine, and it created a sort of a buffer zone between itself and a broader conflict. So states are seeing a value in how nuclear capability can really be used in managing a conventional or the scope of a conventional war. And another aspect is actually how unreliability of international commitments is prevailing itself. You had it by the war, and by the war in Ukraine, the discussion in the Ukrainian politics, but then now a reflection of that in the Iranian side, that how international commitments might not be really sufficient for giving away their national capabilities, because the states might change their decisions in future. The security guarantees might not necessarily work, and as a result, all these dynamics are reflected into a more reliance on self-reliance and self-defense. So I concluded this part by saying that what we are witnessing in the region is a very complex and worrying pattern, and that is about an interconnection of WMD policies. It means that while it's becoming very difficult to talk about one state nuclear policy, we have now three, for example, on the nuclear front, we have three policies at the same time. We have Israeli nuclear ambiguity, we have Iranian nuclear threshold and hedging, and we have Arab states balancing policy. They're very much interlinked together. Touching and moving any of these elements will impact the other actor too. And as a result, this is a very important factor in how we're going to tackle the future of this, and especially in the policy planning, how we can answer properly to this challenge, since they are very much interlinked and attached to each other. And this linkage means that actually, if any of these elements change, you will have a broader change in the whole system. And the tipping point here, as we see right now, is of course Iran's nuclear program and a possible military conflict between Israel and US on one side and Iran on the other side. In that scenario, we probably have at least 4 possible scenarios for nuclear proliferation or a change in a nuclear order in the Middle East. First scenario would be that new states will decide that they need a nuclear weapons, and they move toward building a nuclear bomb. The second scenario would be that there would be more other states, or some states decide that they need a nuclear latency. Basically means that they build the capability, but they don't make the political decision to build the bomb. So they keep the capability, but they don't build the bomb. And this is the second scenario. The third scenario is the US-NATO change of its policy of a nuclear sharing and introduce a new model of a nuclear sharing in the region, which is basically a sort of similar comparison to what the United States did regarding Europe in order to prevent the proliferation in Europe, which was providing the nuclear umbrella to its allies, which of course that seems to be far, but I'm not going to judge any of these scenarios at this moment. And then lastly, it could be the scenario of a revision of Israeli nuclear ambiguity and opening a new chapter in Israeli nuclear policy, which is about announcement of the presence of a nuclear bomb and all-out race between Iran and Israel on a nuclear front. So this is a very not nice scenario, I can put it, for the region, but that's at least what we need to think of. So it's in this context that I want to make some few points about how arms control and non-proliferation and disarmament can be useful, and why it should be a priority in the Middle East, and especially how it can play a role in future security architecture. But before that, let me just give you some few very short definitions of what I mean by arms control and these terms. So by arms control, I mean a set of tools that aims to manage arms competition through constraints on deploying specific categories of weapon. So we just work on deployment of specific categories of weapon in arms control. In disarmament, we refer to eliminating the entire category of weapons, like, for example, elimination of a chemical weapon or nuclear capabilities. It's about an elimination of the entire weapon category. In non-proliferation, we're talking about preventing new states or actors possessing new capabilities that might vertically or horizontally through their allies or in a non-formal way they can achieve. And lastly, we're talking about norms building. It means that how we can develop new principles and measures in establishing collective expectations and responsibilities. So these are all the tools that we have in arms control. And you may ask that, well, arms control might not be it's not the time for arms control, because everyone is building a deterrence, as I was saying before, and everyone is perceiving that its conventional deterrence is shrinking, so why they should go for arms control? They should build up more military capabilities. That might be true, but at the same time, let's not forget that it's also true that arms control is the other side of the coin of a military buildup. Means that it's like a relation of a deterrence and detente. Arms control contributes to deterrence too, because it can address to some of those security concerns that deterrence cannot. Like, remember the US, at that time Soviet Union, and then Russia relationship, which deterrence was complemented by some measures in the arms control domain. Because the arms control can answer to some areas that the military cannot. And also, arms control can build a more conciliatory security environment in which the broader dynamics of a threat reduced in the region. So while we are arguing about the saliency of the deterrence and the continuation of the importance of deterrence for states in the region, but we also argue that arms control can play a role in the model of the future model of a state's deterrence, whatever it is, and that's important that we define how. I have some few ideas, and then I will stop since I don't want to bother more than the time that I've been given, and then maybe in the Q&A I can add more points. Just several areas of arms control in the region that I think are valuable, and we can think about it in different ways. First is making regional system more predictable. That's one of the results of our arms control. Like, remember the INF, Intermediate Nuclear Force and anti-ballistic missile treaties between US and Russia. That helped in the peak of the Cold War that the states become having a more predictability about the other side's activity. We can have similar bilateral mechanisms in the Middle East between some actors, which of course some actors or some discussions that can balance between offense and defense, especially like, for example, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and between Iran and UAE. These are the areas that can be worked for a sort of bilateral discussion on how certain use of weapons could be managed or could be limited in bilateral relationship. Also, there is another area which is about a crisis communication and reducing the risk of escalation. So as I said, we have a real concern about the fact that there might be escalation from conventional domain to the WMD domain. So it means that we need to find a solution for crisis moment and crisis communication. But at the same time, we know that there are more agency of states in the region. The state of Qatar, for example, where we are hosted by them, is quite a big mediator and actor. So there is an urgency felt and responded, and there is this agency by state to be a mediator. So crisis communication has some global models, like one of the most successful of them is the US-Russia Nuclear Risk Reduction Centers, which even worked during the Russian invasion of Ukraine and has played an important role in several moments to prevent a global nuclear war. One of them, several moments, at least 2 times in the 1990s and early 2000. So we can have a similar, region can move to establish similar crisis or risk reduction centers in maritime or in cyber or other less concerning areas which the states are ready to talk at the beginning. And some of the states' new normalizations, and again, back into the example of Saudi Arabia and Iran, they can use this new round of normalization as a context to introduce a sort of risk reduction center, bilateral and then regional between GCC and Iran on certain areas. As I said, maritime and cybersecurity could be the beginners. The third round is transparency and confidence building. And that's one of the areas that arms control, again, has contributed in the past. In the 1992 Open Skies, of course, we are very far in the Middle East to have that sort of treaties. But I think, again, bilaterally between some states in the region, it's possible. One of those areas important is about nuclear transparency. As I said, the states are hearing about the other side's policy by news and by signaling, so there's a huge room for misinterpretation and miscalculation. So why not bringing them together and have a nuclear dialogue on certain areas of policies on a bilateral level. That's a transparency measure and a confidence building. And then we have some responsible norms of behavior as an area of, again, arms control and disarmament can be contributing. And what I mean by that is that, like, there are can be some codified principles in the region based on the region's cultural and religious patterns. I give you an example. Like, people talk sometimes, well, that the fatwa is something that can be changed based on a political context. While that's true, but that's a very context, regionally oriented measure, which, for example, in the case of Iran nuclear program, is playing a role and is putting a limit and constraint on how state can immediately move to a nuclear weapon. So Iranian state is constrained by the fatwa that it's put by its own religious leader. And as a result, it gives you a time and it gives a sort of pre-notification for a change of that fatwa. And this is what we call responsible norms of behavior. Remember, today it's very difficult if people talk, okay, we can use a chemical weapon or we can use a biological weapon, people will fight for it. Like, people will say, oh no, this is like a very taboo. It's like a nuclear taboo. So this is the role of a norms building these taboos of a use or introduction of these capabilities. And then lastly, technological governance, which I think is another area that can be used, especially in AI and other areas. So I've ended my discussion, and then of course I think I will engage with it more in Q&A about the future regional framework, which I think there is no other way except WMD free zone in the Middle East, which is basically the only platform that can answer to all nuclear or chemical and biological policies of regional actors. There is no ad hoc country-specific solution to the WMD threat in the region. As I said, the interconnections are so deep that you cannot just answer one state actor. So while it is important to answer, for example, right now, Iran's nuclear program, but the bigger question is that how Iran's nuclear non-proliferation concern can be linked to the disarmament in the region, nuclear disarmament in the region, which touches Israel nuclear program, and then how that is linked with a whole other safeguard issues and non-proliferation concerns on the Arab states. So I end up here, and then if you want, I can give you more updates of where we are on in UN conference on the nuclear WMD free zone, which is taking place in New York every November since 2019. I would be happy to update you more on that too.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You gave us a lot of food for thought and a lot to be optimistic and a lot to be scared about, I think. I'll open it up to Q&A in a minute, but if I may ask the question that I think is on everyone's mind. For some time now, we've been hearing that, and you alluded to it, that Iran is on the threshold of, it's a threshold state. It's on the threshold of actually building a nuclear weapon. And in preparation for your visit, I went back and looked at some of the news reports that go back to the to the mid-1980s, saying Iran is a year away, 6 months away. And those reports from the 1980s continue up until today. And these are by credible outlets. Bulletin of Nuclear Scientists, these are not by less credible news outlets. So how far is Iran from actually putting together a bomb? And is that a possibility? And what are your thoughts on that? I think it's on everyone's mind.
Well, that's a very good question, but I tried.
I know we could discuss it for 8 days. Right. So if I could have a condensed answer so we can open it up, yes.
I try to answer also concerning my own limits of answering such a question. But, well, I think there's important factor here to distinguish between two factors. First, we have one proliferation approach, which is about capability. It means that do states have the capability to do something? Which means in this case, does the state of Iran has the capability to build a nuclear warhead? So we have international mechanisms to verify that, and that is IAEA, which reports and is showing that Iran probably has the capability. Iran has enough materials, nuclear materials, to build a nuclear warhead, and based on past military dimension of Iran's nuclear activity, there have been works on aspects of technology that relates to the warhead construction. So these are all existing in the IAEA reports, and which can, based on the facts and the visits on the ground and field visits. So this means that Iran has technically the capability. And this technical capability has been also said by the Iranian authorities in different occasions. One of them was Ali Akbar Salehi just last year. That was after the conflict with Israel, tit for tat with Israel, and also Ambassador Kharazi, Dr. Kharazi, who mentioned it, the existing of this capability. However, which we call it latency, or in the case of Iran, which we call it hyper latency, which means about a week of a distance technically to build, or people argue about it, a week or 2 weeks of technical capability to build the first nuclear warhead. I think this is less debated argument. This is a fact on the ground and being confirmed by international observers that if there is a political decision, that could be made. But the question is here, which is the next part of the actual question of your question, which is about hedging. Is there a political decision to do that? And that was what I tried to answer through a military and a political aspect, which the political decision is different from a technical decision because there are many other states like Japan and also South Korea that are also latent states, means that they have the capability to build, but they don't build because there's not a political decision there. So the question about Iran, to answer your question specifically, is that, well, I think the Iranian government has made it very clear that in the case of a change in a threat structure, means if the threat against Iran's national security becomes a nuclear-oriented threat, that was the message of Mr. Kharazi. If Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facility, means a sort of a nuclear threat against Iran, the response will be nuclear. So the threat structure or the policy of a threat balancing or threat adjustment is what probably the principle of Iran in its decision about should it make or should not make a nuclear warhead. This is the first. The second is about the military aspect. So how a military is perceiving its current confidence on deterrence. Personally, I believe, and this is my personal view, I believe that the Iranian military, despite whatever is said outside, is very confident in its current conventional force. You've seen the drills in the last 3 months. That's a show of a force of a confidence on a conventional military force. And what I observe is that there are a few appetite on the military side to move toward that direction. And there are some other technical reasons which we call nuclear posture. So here I need to separate between non-proliferation argument, which was about the capability, hedging, which was about the political decision, and nuclear posture, which is about a military capability of the use of a nuclear warhead. So when you build a nuclear warhead, it means that you need to send a signal to your adversary that you can use it, right? So if you do not have the capability to use a nuclear warhead, what it means that you accept a nuclear risk while you cannot respond. So the next question to ask is that, well, imagine the capability is there. Imagine the political decision is there. The third question, is there other capabilities required to build a nuclear posture or not? And my answer is that no. Iran at the moment do not possess other areas of military capability which requires to have a credible nuclear deterrence. And what are those credibilities? One of them is delivery system. So basically, the country needs to have a way to deliver a warhead. You cannot put a warhead on a missile that has 10% failure rate. It means that if you want to shoot, probably can drop from 10 of, one of your missiles can drop on your own territory. There's no military commander that takes this risk, that put a warhead on a delivery system that might not get out of its own territory. So there is a question on delivery system. Then there is a question on command and control system, or how the decision, because we're talking about the retaliatory strike. So basically, and here I should make it clear that people, it's a mistake to compare Iran's nuclear program with the North Korea nuclear program or the Pakistan nuclear program, because those were developed in secrecy, and were developed in a moment that there was not an actual threat against their facilities. While in the Iranian case, they need to show that they have a credible threat. That's why it's called deterrence. And since these are not, none of these factors are, I would say, that's my personal, very personal assessment, that while there is the nuclear latency there is no hedging strategy, there's no political decision, and the military is not convinced that it can go for that with a very credible way.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thorough answer to a question. Really appreciate it. We have time for a couple of questions. If there are any questions from the audience. Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I have a question about your comment regarding the INF and a possible new INF-like equation that can be applied to our region. The INF came about in a bipolar world, a very predictable bipolar world between two superpowers that understood each other, that had constant communication, and it was easy for them to actually come to such an agreement. Right now, we're in a multipolar world where regional powers are also becoming more capable. Now, in our region, we've got Israel, we've got Turkey, we've got Saudi, we've got Egypt, and we've got Iran. And so how can you actually reconcile all of these countries' interests when there are such existential conflicts between, for example, like Israel and Iran? Because I think that Israel and Iran are the real point of contention, not Saudi and Iran. Saudi and Iran seem like they can actually work something out, but it's Israel and Iran. And so how are we able to reconcile that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me take a couple of questions in the interest of time. Professor Ashur.
Thank you, Al-Rasul. Fascinating as always. And it's actually two very brief questions. One, a follow-up on what was mentioned, because in the end, the regional framework you concluded with will need an enforcer of some sort. So with the U.S. withdrawal and the clash of interest between the other regional powers, who would enforce that? Second, this is a personal assessment again. Probably we had this debate before, but where do you stand on the impact of nukes? So would you say it's a nuclear peace theory of some sort? It will contribute to the nukes kept the Cold War cold. It made peace in Europe last for decades. So would that be an impact in the region if nuclear weapons were disseminated, or would be you mentioned the Israeli approach, which is to use the threat of nukes to get conventional superiority. So in '73, Golda Meir threatened the use of nukes, messaged Nixon that 13 atomic bombs will be airdropped, or else you give me an airlift, a conventional airlift. So it gave them conventional superiority. Or the last, it really doesn't matter. All 9 nuclear powers lost wars. Currently, the Ukrainians are still in Kursk. They invaded the second largest owner of a nuclear arsenal. And until today, 6-7 months later, they could not get them out of it. They had to use light infantry division from North Korea, import North Korean, so dumb it down, not an armored division, a light infantry division, to try to get them out of their own territory against the doctrine, actually. So doctrine doesn't really matter. So which of these 3 options would you personally assess? Thank you.
I'll take 2 more, if I may.
Sure.
Yeah? Dr. Aisha and then Mr. Asai. Dr. Aisha, in the back.
Well, thank you, Dr. Abdul Rasul, for coming back and for this great lecture. I have 2 questions regarding the characterization of the weapons used by Israel. I think you opened your presentation by saying that it's a conventional war, which I'm not quite convinced about it, based on the definition of the weapons of mass destruction. Using the American or the US law definition of these weapons includes the use of a destructive device such as an explosive or incendiary bomb, rocket, or grenade. there were many credible reports that Israel has been using incendiary bombs, cluster bombs, shrapnels, etc., which were causing a mass death and destruction. So how, regarding this, the use this type of weapons, do you still describe the use by Israel as conventional? The second question is, let's admit that the use of the weapons used by Israel are conventional. Looking at the result, the end result that we have, which is over 60,000 deaths and the destruction of 80% of the infrastructure of North Gaza, don't you think that the mass destruction, which is part of the definition of WMD, requires a revision of the definition of the WMD, taking into consideration the fact that the use of conventional weapons can cause the mass destruction? Thank you.
Thank you. One last question, Mr. Asai.
Thank you, Dr. Dev Salar, for the presentation. My question revolves around the Arab countries. Ever since the oil boom in the early 70s, the Middle Eastern countries have spent substantial amount of their budget on purchasing military hardware. And over the decades, these purchases have been exponentially increased. Now, the dichotomy is the exponentially increased in budget allocated to military hardware, yet when they use these arms amongst themselves in regional conflicts and wars, they are either not winning the wars or they are passive, with the exception of Israel, of course. Now, how could you explain this dichotomy between spending so much on purchasing military hardware and losing in the battlefields over the years?
Thank you. Well, I try as my best to answer the question, and please excuse me if I don't answer specifically some of the questions. Well, about the issue of INF, I think the case of INF, what I try to raise is about, I completely agree, first of all, with you that I didn't intend to raise the INF as a model specifically for the Middle East. However, the INF and other treaties at that time helped to make the state behavior predictable. That's the message. So how and what form of a new treaty bilaterally we can have, and again bilaterally, and as I said, since these interconnections that I explained have each of them their own poles, like one of those poles is like Egypt and Israel. One of those poles is, well, I agree that Saudi and Iran is not maybe the core, but it is still part of the issue. And I think Saudi Arabia has made it very clear that it will go respond to Iran's nuclear escalation. So it means that we need to tackle that, means that we need to bring into also Saudi perception of threat and answer that. So that means a sort of a bilateral framework, that INF type of treaty, which basically puts certain limitations on deployments, on actually tests and other usage, different forms of usage of certain categories of weapon, could be still, I think, helpful to manage bilateral relations. But as I said, I think the future is a comprehensive model that includes all of the actors, and that's the WMD free zone, which is basically the only platform that you can have all of those multilateral format that you put, like bring it, like the New York conference these days, not these days in November. Well, of course, in fact, these days, last week was also a working group taking place in New York on the topic. It's basically the only forum existing right now that despite everything, the states are talking about it. And I think that is a value by itself, so by INF I meant that. About Professor Ashur's question, your question is very complex, and I would like to have a thorough discussion with you about that, but I just try to shortly answer your question. I think I personally don't see a nuclear proliferation as a possibility of a peace in the region because of basically what I said about the fact that the Israeli-Iranian conflict is no way comparable to the US-Russia form of competition because of the fact that the two states have not really moved forward in any form of a crisis management model, of an established crisis management model. So they don't recognize each other. As a result, they don't have any direct engagement, while in the case of the US and Russia, you had in place at least the recognition of the states, and as a result, the emplacement of a certain mechanism and tools that could have prevented the escalation. The problem here is that in case of a proliferation, since you don't have any active nuclear de-escalatory mechanism in the region, neither bilaterally, neither through multilateral systems, we are walking in a very gray zone on a very risky area, which really can have huge implications for the region. So personally, I don't think that through the nuclear proliferation we can have a peace in the region. We just incur more risks, which we don't have proper tools to answer to those risks. About the point about the other factor, that like how value of this nuclear deterrence should look like in this complex threat environment, if you like, I agree with you. And I try to, probably that cross-domain strategy concept will answer your question in a sense that, like, states are growingly trying to use to complement different aspects of deterrence with the other form. Like, for example, it's true that the nuclear deterrence did not stop Hamas terrorist attacks to Israel, but at the same time stopped the escalation of the war between Israel and Iran. So in one way, you can interpret it in a way that, well, yes, it was not effective in deterring Hamas, but one may argue that, well, Iranian, when they were calculating the extent of their missile strikes to Israel, they considered the fact that Israel is a nuclear state. And that's why also Iranians consider the fact that when they fire the missile to Pakistan, they are firing to a nuclear state while they have already very established in place crisis management mechanism, which let's not underestimate that Iran and Pakistan have a very well established military to military communication, and which is basically probably exists only between Iran and Oman and Iran and Pakistan. And that has been gone through the military staffs, academic staff. So basically, I think it's important to put it in that context, that how states are seeing it, especially when it comes to existential threat. Professor Aisha, about your question, I think, well, I mostly agree with whatever you said, but honestly, the answer to your question goes back to a very broader reform on how probably maybe should be done on a definition of a WMD, which is beyond my area. And what we cover is, in our definition, WMD is considered nuclear, chemical, and biological in a very concrete terms. I understand where that your way of looking is coming from. I might agree with that, but I think how currently the UN and international system or the treaties, international treaties are seeing WMD is different. That might be a proposal to just think how we can review the definition of the WMD, but I can't comment beyond that. And I think about the issue of Arab states, well, I agree that they are not been willing to use, if you refer the Arab states' intervention in favor of Palestine, if you intend that, because that's where I see probably the Arab states did not use force, because like Saudi Arabia used force in Yemen, they use force in Africa, and they have used different ways or military responses in other conflict zones too. So it's very interpretational how we can put it, why Arab states are not using military force, which To a certain extent, I think they are using it. Again, UAE Saudi operation in Yemen is one case that they have extensively used the military force and their assets that they bought. And well, we can debate how successful or not successful that was. It's another argument. So what I want to say is that that interpretation very much depends on threat perception. So I would say that how states see where actually threat is coming from and where is the core threat to national security is very much driving them to use of the force. And I think probably that the question to your answer is that many of those occasions or moments that you expected Arab states to intervene but they didn't is probably because that was not their core threat perception, and as a result, they have not used the force. And while it's also important to say that I think there is a useful trend, which is a good trend in the region, is about the diversification of a military strategy. It means that complementing military strategy, not but just by use of a force, but by deterrence, by engagement, and by political reach, and maybe in future arms control, which is like complementing the whole concept of security. Because what's the objective of use of the force? If the objective of use of the force is increasing your security or your political leverage, well, what if you can achieve the same objective through other means? That's the whole concept of diversification of a security thinking, which I think some Arab states have been effectively moved toward that space and just try to not use military force. Again, this is very much interpretative. We can say it's good or bad, but I'm just trying to say that probably from their perspective, the core security threat is different. That's why they use, and probably also they have other tools that they have effectively used and they found it useful on those scenarios.
Thank you. This obviously, as your talk and as the questions demonstrate, is a topic that will remain for us. And I am going to extract a promise from you to come back next year and share your insights again with us. And we have all the witnesses here. Please join me in thanking Dr. Deep Salar again. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.